My name's Erin. I'm 22 years old, and this story takes place back in the summer of 1991, long before GPS, smartphones, or social media. I was just a college student trying to make some money before heading back for my final semester. Hey everyone, before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because today's story, it's about karma served with postage due. That summer, I got hired by the U.S. Postal Service as what they called a casual carrier. Basically, I was a temp worker, one of the dozens they brought in every summer to fill in for the regulars while they took their vacations. Now, I was grateful for the job. The pay was better than anything I'd done before. But from the moment I walked into that post office, I knew I wasn't in for an easy ride. The place was built like a fortress from the Cold War. Tall gray walls, narrow hallways, and a smell of paper, sweat, and machine oil that never really left your clothes. There were no cameras back then, but that didn't mean we weren't being watched. The post office had secret back corridors, hidden windows, even little raised viewing spots where supervisors could spy on the workroom floor. We were timed on everything. When you started sorting, when you loaded your mail, track. When you left, when you returned. If you were too slow, you got chewed out. If you were too fast, they assumed you were cutting corners. I was determined to keep my head down and do my work, but it didn't take long before I met someone who made that impossible. His name was Dave, and Dave was the kind of guy who gave small men with a little power a very bad name. Imagine a middle-aged man with a fading mustache, mirrored sunglasses, and a voice that always sounded like he was trying to talk over everyone else in the room. He'd been with the Postal Service for years and thought that made him untouchable. I was assigned as his T6, meaning I covered his route whenever he was off. For context, full-time carriers only worked 5 days a week, but the mail got delivered 6. So, temps like me filled in that 6th day. But Dave saw me as free labor. He started dumping all the heavy work on me. Every week, when I came in to run his route, there'd be mountains of undelivered junk mail, thick catalogs, and heavy product samples waiting for me. The kind that made your shoulder ache and your fingers go numb halfway through the day. I asked around. Turns out, he was deliberately saving all the bulk mail for my days so he could take it easy the rest of the week. When I confronted him, he laughed. And then he leaned in real close and said, "You're just a temp, sweetheart. You don't get a say in how things work around here." The worst part, he was right, at least on paper. When I tried to complain to my supervisor, I got the same dismissive answer. "He's full-time. You're not. Just deliver what's there. You'll make overtime." But the thing about me, I've never been good at letting people walk all over me, even when I don't show it right away. So, instead of fighting him head-on, I smiled. I went back to my route, and I started planning something that would eventually make Dave wish he'd never crossed me. Part 2, run faster. Watch closely. I'll be honest. At first, I tried the reasonable route. I told my supervisor that Dave was leaving the bulk of his heavy stuff for me. I said it like a question, like maybe I'd misunderstood how the job worked. The supervisor nodded and said the thing supervisors always say when they're trying not to offend a full-timer: "We'll have a quiet word." Then he added, with an almost apologetic shrug, "You're making overtime, Erin. Deliver it and don't worry about the time." That line, "don't worry about the time," stuck with me. It wasn't permission. It was an invitation to be used. So I decided to play the only card I had that didn't involve shouting matches or walking off the job. Outwork him. Outsmart him. Quietly. For the next week, I treated that route like a training run. I learned the addresses the way you learn the pattern in a song. not by rote, but by feeling the rhythm between houses, the way sidewalks cut around hedges, the little back gates where people kept their bins. I watched where deliveries clustered and where they spread out. I learned which doors were set back 10 meters and which porches were right at the sidewalk. Knowledge is advantage on a route. The kind of advantage a temp is meant to lack so they don't threaten a full-timer's numbers. I made that advantage mine. Then I asked for an extra carrier bag. These aren't glamorous. Just canvas satchels with straps that let you carry a lot more without running back to the Jeep. Every 3 houses. I told them it would speed things up and save me trips. The postmaster approved it in a clipped. Fine, take one way, probably thinking it would make my life easier and not change the big picture. What he didn't know was how much of a difference those little changes would make on the first day I really tried it. 3 bags loaded for a single leg of the route. I felt like I had secret wings. I moved from door to door with a kind of efficient momentum I hadn't known I had. One jogged between clusters of houses, not sprinting, but running with purpose. The weight was there, sure, but the extra bag meant I didn't have to keep returning to the truck to reload. I could flow. By the end of that afternoon, I had a stupid grin on my face because the stopwatch in my head told me I'd shaved a full hour off the expected time. A few months later, I was sitting on my dorm bed when my phone rang. It was Martha, one of the senior carriers from my old branch, the type of woman who always knew everything to days before anyone else did. Her voice came through with a mix of gossip and satisfaction. "You're not gonna believe this, Erin," she said. "Your old buddy Dave, he's out, gone, fired." I didn't even pretend to be surprised. "For what?" "Oh, the usual," she replied. "They pulled his time cards and route logs. Turns out he'd been clocking extra time. He wasn't working, taking extended breaks at the diner, and even leaving bulk mail in the back of the truck. You know, the stuff you were delivering for him." There was a pause, the kind that makes a grin creep up before you can stop it. I felt the tiniest pulse of satisfaction run through me. Not gloating, not mean, just the quiet, balanced click of justice finally finding its mark. "Guess he finally got his souvenir," I said. Martha laughed. "Oh, honey, that's one way to put it." Management had the Inspector General's office come through. They reviewed the whole branch. Couple supervisors got transfers, and they're recalculating route times now. You kind of lit a fire under the whole operation. That made me sit back. I hadn't thought of it that way. I was just trying to survive that summer, to not get buried under someone else's laziness or ego. But it turns out, when you do your job right in a place built on shortcuts, you don't just change the numbers, you change the spotlight. After we hung up, I thought about all those humid mornings, the smell of truck oil and paper, the feel of envelopes sticking to sweat on my arms. Every little step that summer had felt like a grind. But in hindsight, it was a slow build towards something poetic, a lesson wrapped in sweat and asphalt. It wasn't about revenge in the fiery, dramatic sense. It was quieter, colder, cleaner. Revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it's just precision, doing the things someone else can't do right, and letting the world see the difference. I heard later that Dave tried to pick up work at another branch, but the post office moves slow and holds grudges. His file probably followed him like a shadow. And me? I graduated, moved on, and every now and then, when someone tried to underestimate me again, I remembered that summer, the old mail truck, the heat, the insult, the smirk, and the way I turned it all into a quiet win. So when people ask me if I ever got even, I tell them, "Oh, yeah, I got him a souvenir, a real one. I got him fired from the post office." And that, as far as I'm concerned, was first-class delivery because of how deliveries were tracked. Punches into routes and back out again. None of my early runs flagged anything suspicious. Temps were expected to be slower. Full-timers were expected to be fast. The system's assumptions protected the steady state. I exploited those assumptions like a chess move. I was careful. I logged everything properly, and I never, ever left mail undelivered. The other carriers noticed. The ones who were decent about this job slid me little tips in the break room. Which doorway to take to shave 30 seconds. Which household light to chat and could be politely waved off. The more I learned, the faster I got. The rhythmic footwork of delivering became muscle memory. Week after week, I cut into that 4.5-hour estimate until it looked laughably generous. Then the fun part began. Dave took his 2-week vacation. He'd been proud of his weeks off, the way some men hold a trophy up in a small town. He swaggered out on holiday and left me with a mountain of bulk mail. I can still picture it, the extra pallets of catalogs stacked by the bay like small islands. He'd done this on purpose before, but now he'd stepped into a trap of his own setting. 6 days a week I did his route. I did it properly, every item delivered, every magazine, every sample. I jogged parts I'd learned to jog. I treated mail like a sequence of small tasks rather than an inconvenience. And because I did it properly, the heavy stuff didn't pile up for a single weekly dump. That week's bulk got parceled out across the days. I finished the route in under 3 hours most days. There were times I clocked in and out and the figures made the supervisor's eyebrows raise. Which, of course, is when the postmaster called me in. I sat across from him in his tiny office with the calendar tacked to the wall and the smudged coffee mug. He asked me to explain my timekeeping. I kept my face blank and told a story of efficiency. I told him how I'd spread the heavy deliveries across the week, how I'd learned the neighborhood, how extra bags cut down on my trips. My tone was a model of the earnestness the post office liked, helpful, compliant. A little puzzled as to why this was an issue. He squinted at me like someone is regarded when they're trying to read small print. "Are you delivering everything?" he asked. That question could kill you in this job. Throwing away mail was a criminal offense. Losing packages a career ender. I felt my face tighten. "Yes," I said simply. "Every piece. I wouldn't risk not delivering." He pressed. "This route has been budgeted at 4.5 hours for years. Aaron, I don't understand how you're doing it in 3. I gave him the only answer that made him more unnerved than anything else. I said I thought the route was sloppily calculated for the current density of housing, and that some older carriers were taking liberties with breaks and conversations. I asked, innocently, if that was something headquarters might want to review. My voice sounded like the concerned temp asking for clarity. But what I was doing was planting a seed. When Dave came back from holiday, he was in full swagger mode. He found me, and true to the story, he reached into his pocket, grinned like a small-town king, and produced what he thought was a hilarious token. His middle finger, held up in imitation. He chuckled, the sort of low, ugly sound men make when they think they've scored a point. I smiled back, offered him a thanks for the souvenir in my best cheery voice, and kept my hands visible and relaxed. A small performative exchange. If I'd let anger take me that day, if I'd shoved him back or thrown his mocking gesture into his face, the whole story might have ended differently. But I'd chosen another way. What I didn't know then, what Dave didn't know, was how his days of loafing and long chats with residents would look in stark relief against an honest, efficient run by a temp who refused to play along. My fast times became a number on a spreadsheet. His slower pace became a trend. Supervisors talk, and spreadsheets bite. A few weeks later, I was no longer there. College called me back, and I left with my sneakers and a suitcase and a pocket full of overtime cash. That summer I'd earned in a few months what would help me through classes that fall. Later, a friend called to tell me something I'd secretly hoped for but had kept from wishing aloud. Dave had been disciplined and then fired. The numbers had been audited, his roots checked, and the documentation said what the human I had already seen: a pattern of unauthorized breaks, slow times, and questionable behavior on the clock. His union fought for him, as unions do. They sifted through logs and statements. The post office administration had to show their own work too, and in the end the evidence, times, logs, testimonies, stacked against Dave. He lost his job. The woman who had taken on the route full-time after him, the regular T6, had been overwhelmed with his bulk mail for years and finally had the chance to keep the route because she could actually prove she delivered consistently when it mattered. I'll never take credit for making the system do this. The post office was built to measure work. I simply used those measurements honestly and to my advantage. I didn't snitch with spite. I performed my job better than how he'd been doing his. That's the kind of trap that feels clean. You don't have to lie. You don't have to cheat. You just have to be better and let the accounting do the rest. Stop. By the time I left town, Dave was still arguing in the break room, hands flapping, sunglasses on his head like a bad crown. He told people I'd been too fast and that the supervisors had set me up. I laughed quietly because it's always easier when the records do the talking. The final irony, for me, was the memory of that tiny souvenir he thought was the last word, a childish flick. That became the last small chapter of his career. Thanks for staying till the end. Tell me in comments from which part of the world you are listening, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more interesting videos.